Hi, I'm Mariska Breland. I'm co-founder of the Neuro Studio, and I've been living with multiple sclerosis since 2002. I've learned a lot about a lot of different symptoms of MS since that time. I've learned about balance issues, muscle spasticity, foot drop, insomnia, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. But one symptom that can be particularly debilitating is fear. And sure, we might share our fears with our family and our dear friends and maybe fellow patients. But what about treating fear? Is it just about taking yet another medication? Fear is actually a fascinating thing. You can't not have it. It's designed to protect us. And you can't exactly preempt it because fear signals actually travel faster than rational thought. The following video dives deep into the science of fear and fear management. At the end, I'll take you through some of my favorite fear exercises to help you name your fears and figure out how to use neuroscience to help manage them. There's a lot to unpack about fear and some fascinating things about it. MS is obviously a frightening disease with frightening symptoms. Understanding why fear is such a strong emotion can help us manage it better. I'm also going to tell you why I think you should do things that scare you, what I'm going to call fear training, and have that as part of your healthcare plan. First, know that fear is completely normal. It's evolutionarily important. If you don't experience fear in many different aspects of your life, that would be really weird. Fear is designed first and foremost to protect us, and most of that fear is learned behavior. We're only born with two fears. We're afraid of falling, or rather being dropped, and we're afraid of loud noises. Everything else is something we fear because we either had a bad experience ourselves or someone else told us to be afraid of it. The most common fears that we are explicitly taught are snakes, bugs, mice, bats, heights, and water. What all of those things have in common is that they're potentially dangerous, so many of our parents or our friends told us that these things are bad or that we needed to be worried about them or careful around them. Let's talk about snakes, or what I like to call nope ropes. I grew up in Virginia Beach, and we had garter snakes and rat snakes, which aren't actually dangerous at all. They're not poisonous, they'll leave you alone. But we also had water moccasins, which are in the category of a pit viper, and they can actually kill you or make you wish you were dead. I don't think I ever saw one, but I know they existed, and I'm pretty sure my parents told me just avoid all snakes. My dad was probably fine around any type of snake, but my mom ensured that no snake that entered our yard left it. I can also vividly remember my very first nightmare. It involved a snake eating my sister. I must have been around 4 or so, but I literally can still picture that dream. If I see something slithering, in the grass or the woods now, I'm definitely going to have some sort of reaction. I'll jump, I'll be afraid. Fear also has a genetic component. If you come from fearful parents, they probably passed fears along to you through both nature and nurture. From an early age, I was afraid of heights, just being close to the edge of something that I could fall, and I was always afraid that I could hurt myself. I never really did handstands or cartwheels because of that. Now, my mother believed that disasters and injuries were more likely an impending probability than a distant possibility. Back in the 80s, when no one, and I mean no one, wore bike helmets, my mom got the idea that we needed to wear them because of something she saw on the local news. The only helmets they had at that time were white. They were like styrofoam. I think they were actually polystyrene, and they were guaranteed to ostracize us from our peers. I recall at age 10 telling my mom in no uncertain terms that if she bought said bike helmet, I would wear it no further than to the end of the street before chucking it. Now, that time was also the era when Adam Walsh, the son of future America's Most Wanted host John Walsh, was found decapitated after a kidnapping. I don't know if my mom's fears and worries for us came from raising children during that time, or because she was in a country whose customs were foreign to her and made her extra wary. All I know is that it was different in the Netherlands when I was a kid. We went in the summers. My mom was like a whole different person. We were allowed to be out late at night. We could ride our bikes till 10. We didn't really have to check in. She wasn't as worried. My mom was the kind of mom who would warn us not to do things by saying, "Be careful, You're going to hurt yourself. You could fall. I asked a friend of mine who has what I consider a really brave child what kinds of things that she said to him when he was growing up. And she said, make good choices. And he doesn't have fear the same way that my sister and I have fear. When my mom was a kid, she did gymnastics as part of just gym class at her school. And they actually even did the uneven bars. And I know that she had a bad fall and hurt her back. So her fear of falling and hurting herself was likely passed along to her kids with her warnings that we could also fall and hurt ourselves. But it's also possible that those fears were genetic. There was a study around 2013 with mice and orange blossoms. Orange blossoms aren't actually dangerous to mice at all. In the study, one group of mice were exposed to them and nothing happened. Another group was given an electric shock whenever orange blossoms were around. The children and the grandchildren of those mice expressed fear at the scent of orange blossoms. Fears can be encoded in the genes, so maybe my mom was overly cautious, or maybe her genes were. Back to what happens when we're afraid. The typical response to those parts of the brains being activated are that we want to fight, flee, or freeze. I'm a freezer. I literally just shut down if I get scared. Fear stimulus are always going to go to the primitive parts of your brain first. Those are the parts that we've had since before we had any type of rational thought. And what's interesting is that primitive brain works 5 times faster than any other parts of your brain. It's physically impossible not to experience fear unless there's something wrong or very different about your brain. The first reactions to fear happen in the limbic system, the amygdala, which regulates emotion, and the hypothalamus, which activates the pituitary gland to push out the stress hormone cortisol. Then all sorts of other things start to happen to your body. And if you don't pay attention to them, they're going to escalate. They're going to be like a toddler throwing a temper tantrum if it's not getting its attention. Your sympathetic nervous system turns on and you start to sweat. But it's not regular sweat. It's that strangely stinky sweat that you have when you're nervous or stressed or afraid. What's the purpose of that? It's actually so that other people will pay attention to it and know that there's danger. Remember, we're just animals with better accessories. Your heart beats faster to send blood away from your heart into your extremities so that if you need to run, you can. You're going to start to breathe faster and your pupils will dilate so you can see better. As some parts of your brain turn on, other parts of your brain turn off. The parts of your brain responsible for reasoning and judgment actually become impaired, so you don't think clearly. This is why you might scream in a haunted house, even though chances are good that the zombie isn't actually going to try to kill you. I mean, they're good, but they're never zero. Your digestive and urinary systems shut down because your body just can't be bothered to deal with that right now. But there's another actor at play as well, the vagus nerve, your 10th cranial nerve. This one goes from your brainstem into your torso and it branches into your heart, your lungs, your stomach, and your intestines. You might feel sick to your stomach and your heart rate and your blood pressure can completely drop. And you might experience something called vasovagal syncope, which is a fancy word for fainting. Since I've experienced this in several different situations, I can tell you that what happens is you start to feel a little nauseous. You feel like maybe you have to puke or maybe you have to poop, but something's going to happen. You feel like darkness start to close in and you feel really clammy. You can have syncope from fear, and you can also have it from getting too hot, which has happened to me. And it can happen if you're just standing still for too long because your blood goes down into your legs and it doesn't get pushed back up. I once embarrassingly fainted at a concert because I was standing in a crowd for hours. The best way to get out of a crowd is to faint because someone will come get you. In an ideal situation, the vagus nerve is going to activate your parasympathetic nervous system so that your body can relax faster after stress. It can actually counteract the fight or flight response, but sometimes it doesn't. All of these primitive brain reactions not only move faster through your body and brain, but bad memories are actually much more likely to stick than good ones. So what do? We can't push away fear regularly because it will respond by elevating every potential threat into a catastrophe. We do have 2 other parts of our brain, though, that can help. We just need to know how to access them. The evolved brain is made up of the frontal lobe and the prefrontal cortex. It's the rational part of our brain. It can plan and analyze and strategize. It can look at the fear situation and judge it. That might be a snake, but it's 5 feet away from me. Maybe I moved to New Zealand and there aren't actually any poisonous animals. For MS, let's say I have a new lesion that shows up on my MRI, but I don't have any symptoms. So I know that there can be workarounds and your brains can find other ways to do things. So probably that's what's happening here. A couple of relevant limiting facts about that rational brain though. First, it doesn't fully develop until you're around the age of 25. That's why we do dumb and dangerous things all the time when we're young. I remember this one time, about 9 of my friends got into my friend Brian's Jeep after a football game to go to the beach. He had one of those Jeeps that you could take off doors, so literally the doors would unzip, and then it didn't have a roof. I was sitting on someone's lap in the back seat without a seatbelt. About a decade later, I remember reading about a group of kids who got into a car accident on a notoriously bad Virginia Beach road called Shore Drive. It's the site of literally dozens of fatal accidents. It was the same road that we drove that night. Now, my immediate thought was how dumb these kids were to be going that fast on that road without seatbelts, yet I had done exactly the same thing when I was their age. Second, that rational brain can also be the victim of something called cognitive distortion. That's an irrational thought pattern that's more likely if you have depression or anxiety. It could be an overgeneralization. If you failed 2 math tests, you're bad at math. It could as likely be that your teacher is actually bad at teaching. Cognitive distortion could be you only focusing on the negatives. Yeah, I have pretty hair, but I'm too skinny. Nobody's going to like me. Maybe you catastrophize things, and every single MS symptom makes you think you're going to end up bedbound. So to manage fear and for cognitive distortion, we need another part of our brain that I'm going to call the librarian brain. This part of your brain holds memory. It knows that you had new symptoms before or new lesions before, and yet you're okay. It remembers that you got an A in algebra, and that was when you really liked your teacher. It also remembers the snake that didn't bite, the time you didn't drown, the scary bridge that you walked across successfully. The librarian brain also holds procedural memory, which is how you do something without having to think about it, like driving. Your working memory is slow. It's when you have to think about what you're doing. We revert to working memory when we're under pressure. So if you're thinking about walking, that's happening at your working memory. If you can switch it back to your procedural memory by not overanalyzing every single thing that's happening, it's actually going to be easier to walk. We need to be able to find ways to get out of a fear state and then get into our procedural memory and also fill the library brain with good experiences. Nice present experiences, nice new memories. More on that in a sec. Let's talk about chronic illness, pain, and fear. Kinesiophobia is the fear of movement, and your well-meaning doctors, physical therapists, and possibly even things in this workshop that will never happen to you can turn that on. If you're going to get a shot and the doctor says, this is only going to hurt a little, it's only a pinch, your brain can't unhear hurt or pinch. There's actually a famous exercise. Try not to think of an elephant. Obviously, you're now thinking of an elephant. If you've had pain before because of spasticity or neuropathic pain, and you get a tiny twinge of that pain, it's actually really hard for your brain not to go straight into fear mode. If there's an activity that made it worse or started that symptom for you, you probably don't want to do it anymore. If your left foot hurts, you might avoid putting weight on it, and then you move less and it hurts more. The cycle becomes pain, immobility, fear of moving, more tightness, more weakness. It becomes more painful and more difficult to move. Once that idea is stuck in your head, you've literally changed your brain. Now to fix it, we need to reverse the cycle. We need to change the description. That shot isn't going to hurt a little. That shot is going to be over in a second. That spasticity isn't pain, it's tightness. That neuropathic pain isn't burning, it's just a sensation. Now, I personally have neuropathic pain, and I know it's not easy or always possible to turn that off, but I also know that science backs your ability to change how you perceive something and then how much fear you have about it. Let's talk about what everyone's number one fear in life is. It's judgment. I am much less afraid of becoming disabled than I am of people judging me for failing to not become disabled. Because I've been out here for 20 years talking to people about exercise and neurological conditions and how to be stronger and how to move better. I'm also afraid of handstands, but what I'm really afraid of is falling and having people laugh at me. Because in elementary school, I tried to do a cartwheel, I fell, and the class laughed. Anything that is toxic to our self-image will turn on our primitive brain as fast as a bear running straight at us. This picture is a perfect example of the fear of embarrassment overcoming my fear of injury or pain. This is me on the Cheat River in West Virginia in 2004. It has several sections of Class 5 rapids, including this one. Everyone on this whitewater rafting trip was told before it began that it was running especially fast that day and you will go swimming. When we got to this particular rapid, which is, I'm not kidding, called the Big Nasty, the first group flipped their boat, the second group flipped their boat, and then all of the other people in all of the other boats decided to carry them on land instead of attempting it. And then my boyfriend and one other guy and the raft guide decided we should just do it. I was numb because I was terrified. But even though 4 other people in our boat decided to walk, I stayed because my fear of being embarrassed in front of the guy that I was dating overcame my fear of death and drowning. And yes, we did flip the boat. A couple more things to know about your brain and fear before we get into strategies to deal with it. Social comparisons. It's impossible not to compare yourself to other people. This is a biological necessity of the primitive brain. It wants to figure out 2 things. 1, can you take this person in a fight over resources? And 2, would you want to form an alliance and have them be on your team? So your friends that you hang out with today are most likely people that your primitive brain decided it wanted on your team. Another part of your brain that's fascinating and none of us want to admit we have is something called the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, which processes mental conflicts. It actually lights up like a Christmas tree when you see somebody fail at something. Even if we don't want to, we very likely feel like a kind of rush seeing someone get knocked down a notch on the social ladder because our primitive brain sees it as moving us up a notch. Okay, so we're basically scared, bitchy toddlers who probably got this way because mistakes of our well-intentioned and emotionally scarred parents. So what can we do? Train fear. Training fear makes you more adaptable to challenges, and it gives you confidence to deal with scary things in every aspect of your life. And you want to combine the things that actually cause you fear with a neutral response. To do that, we need to get really specific about what that real fear is. We need to name it. I'm afraid of MS. Get specific about the perceived threat. I'm afraid I might not be able to move. What's the real threat? People are going to judge me. So the core fear is judgment. Next, we have to make concrete goals and then go after them in sort of achievable, small bites. We need to change how we talk about it. It's judgy to say, I can't do X. So it's better to say, I can work on Y to get better at X. Then we have to feed our librarian brain by creating opportunities for success. They do not have to come from our core fear. I'm still a little afraid of handstands and being upside down. I go to a trainer who's a gymnastic strength trainer. He can do like 1-armed handstands. So every single week we work on handstands and we kept doing it even when I had a broken leg. Every time I don't hurt myself, which has been every single time that I've done a handstand with him, I get a little boost of the brain chemical dopamine. Dopamine is very addictive and it makes us want to do something again, and it can help neuroplastic changes in our brain stick. This is something called excitation transfer, where your body and brain actually stay aroused after the fear ends. And for most of us, that's a good type of arousal. I'm also developing procedural memory on how to do a handstand and how to fail at it. There's an idea in fitness training that you want to learn to fail better so that you'll be less scared of it. I doubt a middle-of-the-room handstand without a spotter is coming anytime soon or maybe ever, but I'm okay doing them with one. And I even did them in a workshop on fear and exercise for Pilates Anytime. Plus, I didn't have them edit out the fails. So now the next time MS comes around, kicking me with something I fear, my librarian brain knows I've done things that were scary to me. Not only have I done them, I've done them successfully, and I've done them a lot. I've survived MS flare-ups. I've adapted to walking with an ankle that doesn't want to bend. I've tripped and fallen in front of people. And yes, I was embarrassed. And yes, I very vividly remember the whole experience, but it wasn't as bad as I imagined it could be. Finally, you've already done one of the very best things you can do to overcome your fear. You've learned more about the thing you fear. A couple more things that can help: breathing with your mouth closed, because an open mouth is not really different from a gasp to what your brain thinks is happening. So it doesn't know the difference between you're breathing with your mouth open and there's a lion chasing you. Also, doing exercises in mindfulness and meditation can be a huge help. Okay, so we know fear is a primitive function and that we're not going to outwit it by wishing it away. First, let's get our brain primed with some dopamine. Dopamine is part of the reward pathway, and it's really good for neuroplasticity. We're going to search our memories for some past successes. So I was valedictorian, and I graduated summa cum laude from college. Now, this has actually proven to be very useless in my life, but I did work hard to get those things. I even got a scholarship to college by writing them a letter about how I thought it was crazy that they didn't give me a scholarship when a lot of other colleges did. And I just wrote a letter and I got a scholarship for writing that letter. So don't be afraid to ask. I have a patent on a Pilates fitness product, and I got that after a really big Pilates company told me there was no way I would get it patented. I've owned and managed multiple successful businesses. And one thing that was a really big one was I obtained documents from 3 different countries, including filing a successful Freedom of Information Act request to land dual citizenship with my mother's native country, which doesn't like giving citizenship to anybody. Now, it doesn't matter what's on your list of successes. Just think of 10 or more things that you've done that weren't easy, but you still did them. This motivates us to work hard to get more accomplishments in the future. Basically, we're just feeding into the reward pathway, and in doing so, we're creating a cycle of achievements. Another thing that you can do is really figure out what the fear that you have is. So I just wrote this out as a brain dump regarding how I'm feeling at this moment. I'm afraid that I'm going to keep progressing and end up unable to walk, and that I'm going to then be stuck in my house forever. I'm never going to get better. I'm already a bad dog mom because I can't take my dog on walks when it's hot or when it's cold. I can't risk him pulling me because I'm so unbalanced. And what if he gets loose and he runs out into the street and gets hit by a car? Once you put your fears down, you can start dissecting them to figure out what's true, what's false, and what's potentially fixable. So first, I'm afraid I'm going to keep progressing and end up being unable to walk. That is completely fair. I know many people who have MS who aren't able to walk anymore, but they aren't stuck in their homes. And arguably, and it's possibly because they're way more extroverted than I am, they're actually doing more things out in the world than I do. They might be using mobility aids, but those allow them to travel further distances than I can. And then they also have sort of a backup if their legs decide to stop working. So being stuck in the house would be a choice if I lost mobility. I mean, there are quadriplegics who are out there traveling and going all sorts of places and doing all sorts of things. I'm never going to be able to get better. Now, that's also possibly true. But there have been times where it was harder to walk than it is today, and then I did improve. It was never full improvement or perfect walking or able to run again. But when that improvement happened, I was doing different things than I'm doing now. I was making myself walk more. I was doing more e-stim and other things that, for whatever reason, I just stopped doing. So if I revisited what has worked for me in the past, that might work for me again. Also, there are a lot of things that I haven't tried because it's been a lot of years since the last time I really looked out there and said, okay, what on this list haven't I tried to make moving easier? Next, the dog. Now, it's true that I really can't handle being outdoors during weather extremes, but that doesn't necessarily make me a bad dog mom. My dog is really well trained, and we do have more of an intellectual relationship than a physical one. Dog training for tricks and for obedience can actually tire your dog out as much or more than physical activity. And I'm also lucky that I have a husband who can take him on walks, and there's organizations like WAG that could do that if he's not around. Plus, I have a big backyard. I could also look into getting a walking bike or another thing to make me less likely to fall over if I do want to take the dog on longer walks. Now, in the case of the dog and me being a dog mom, that's actually not so much a fear as a judgment that I'm placing on myself because I'm currently feeling badly about my walking. Fear might overwhelm you, but instead of staying with that, look at your past successes, try to do things to build on more successes, and that doesn't have to be related to your disease at all. And then look at your fears and try to break them down objectively and impassionately. I cannot promise you a fear-free MS life. I don't think that exists, but hopefully you can find ways to make your fears more manageable.